I think that there's a cultural dynamic where those of us who have had the fortune of walking straight through the prescription, you go to college, you may get a master's, you have a whole bunch of internships, and that proves your worth, and you climb the ladder very carefully. That relies on understanding how that process works. And I think that there's a deep gulf between education and the people whose cultures we tend to appropriate. And so that is something where you have to do probably twice as much, 4 times as much work to get that person to understand how the system works, and either help them to change the system so that it can work for them, or help them to fit into the system in a way that's meaningful and leads to them to be able to be successful. And I think that it may not seem like that work is worth it. And it may also seem like that work is overwhelming, or that it might yield less of a bottom line. But I think that investing in your talent and really showing that you mean what you say is something that all of us who are in leadership positions, and all of us who have led these change movements at our agencies and around the world, I think we're in a position where we have to actually mean it, and we have to stick to what we said. And it rings so hollow when people are just like, well, we have 4 open seats and 2 of them should be filled by people of color. That it doesn't work quite that way.
Welcome to EventSpeak with me, Big John, CEO of Beyond Experiential. So today's guest is Kate Gardiner. She is the founder and CEO of Grey Horse. They are a full-service communications agency based in New York, and we're thrilled to have her on the show today. Kate, thanks so much for joining us. Welcome to EventSpeak.
Hey, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Kate, tell us a bit about who you are and what you do and what Grey Horse is all about.
Sure. So Grey Horse is a social justice first agency. We do all of the usual stuff from, your Instagram and Facebook posts all the way through global social strategies and all sorts of other PR communications things. We've been instrumental in the Me Too movement, with the environmental movement, and all sorts of other types of organizations and sort of cultural moments. In addition to that, we represent lots and lots of people, from celebrities to prominent technologists and people that on all sorts of platforms. And we also work a lot with authors and books. So we've launched lots of things that you've probably read. We've been here since about 2012, and my background is as a journalist. So I went to Northwestern and Brandeis to study that way back when. But thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Now, with your work, it's very impressive. You guys have been recognized by many different organizations: Forbes 30 Under 30, Emmy nominations, the Next J Fellowship by Radio, Television, Digital News Association. Just to name a few. Is there one of these that's really special to you and Grey Horse, and if so, why?
The awards are what they are. We all are cynical about them at this point, but it was a turning point to get the Forbes 30 Under 30, if only because at 29 and a half, it's the last time I could get that. But it was also important to me because it puts you on a different scale, and the opportunities that it afforded us sort of opened many, many doors. It put me on all sorts of committees, and I've traveled all over the world as both a speaker and that type of person, as well as someone who's gotten the opportunity to consult on all sorts of different things that have happened in the last 10 years. So I think, since 2015, that one really changed the way that we work and we're able to work.
That's got to be, something where, like as you said, if nothing else, with awards, they kind of give you that much more of a voice sometimes, and open up those doors for you to be able to pursue out even further into what you're doing. So, I mean, it sounds like Grey Horse is multifaceted. You mentioned several different avenues that you guys go down. Would you say in what capacity do events play into your portfolio? As we were talking off camera, you mentioned it's about a 30-year business, right?
So we believe in audience engagement and community strategy. And as part of that, there's naturally a real life component. And so we have thrown huge events. Our biggest is 2,000 or 3,000 people. Our smallest are typically 10 to 20 people. These days we do Zooms that go anywhere from 10 people to 200. We're actually executing a conference we expect to be in the thousands at the beginning of December at the moment. And it's interesting because our events are a part of our communication strategy for our clients. They're not always standalone. We, of course, do standalone events when they come in, but in general, they're part of a brand building or community building effort for whoever it is we're speaking with. And
Gotcha.
that changes on a quarterly basis because, hey, it's pandemic, but that's the philosophy that came into building the agency. In general, we see ourselves as a vertically integrated communications firm. So we can do everything from your Twitter to bringing 700 of your clients to somewhere remote for a retreat.
Wow. Okay. So I've got to ask you, coming from a journalistic background, you've created clearly a multifaceted agency. Like, walk me through the journey, if you will, the Wikipedia version of it. Like, how were you able to build this? Essentially, I mean, I'm guessing it was you to start. You had this idea.
It's still mostly me these days.
Okay.
You give it more shape than it probably had. Basically, I was a really good freelancer. And so I kept needing to hire people because I would win more work than I could possibly do. And then someone told me that that's called an agency. And I was like, oh, okay, cool.
That's what they call it. Okay.
So that's kind of how it came together. I had business partners for a while. They left a few years ago. And in general, I have really enjoyed building my own company. Both my parents are entrepreneurs. My dad's an attorney and my mom's a shepherd. And so between them, I've watched them build businesses my whole life. And it occurred to me that I didn't really ever learn how to be sort of the corporate drone that the modern media ecosystem really demands. And so I was a really strange person to hire sometimes. And I had a lot of very strange experiences because coming out of journalism school in 2009, we had a mixture of the recession and the first recession, and also just utter chaos in the media industry as the media model fell apart. So I also started out in consulting, which was how to rebuild your media organization and shape it for the future. And I wanted to get beyond firing people. So that's
I get it. I get it. Believe me, while very different, my path hasn't been too different than yours. I think that it's interesting when as you said, you're a freelancer, and I think we've all freelanced and probably still freelance even as we create agencies. I feel like we just escalate our freelancing, if anything, and it's always interesting to see where sometimes just through the need that identify with your clients of what services you're able to offer. And sometimes I think, I don't know about you, but we have found that, well, hey, there's clearly a need for this, and we haven't considered that. Maybe this is something that we can accommodate. Now, with you guys, you're clearly an advocate and a pioneer in the social justice capacity of bringing that into what you're doing with your agency. Can you offer some general advice for companies that are out there that are still, it's a male-dominated business, male-dominated world for that matter, both small and large? Do you want to, they want to initiate, promote, and maybe change? Could you offer some general advice to those companies that might be out there watching right now of how they can do that?
How to change in the context of elevating women, or how to change in the context of DEI or other thing like that?
Well, let's look at it from more of the equality standpoint, where, as you said, you know, to be able to give women more of a voice and to be able to have a fair shot at, you know, opportunities and jobs they're qualified for, but maybe aren't getting because it's a male-dominated business.
Well, I think it's changed in the last little bit, if only because I'm hearing more and more complaints from straight white men that they can't get hired. So at least at the moment, we're having a little bit of a renaissance. I don't know how long it'll last. But I hope some of us are here to stay. A good friend of mine, Katie Longmire, just got hired as the managing director of Mother, for example, which is a really cool gig for her and speaks to both her resume and also to the fact that she is an awesome, awesome lady of color now in a leadership position. But she is, few and far between. We also have a good friend who was just hired as the head of Amazon Prime Video, and she's going to get to be able to do all sorts of crazy stuff over there. That's Ukanwa Ojo. I think that there are all sorts of different ways that you can elevate the women around you. I think I've heard all sorts of crazy things happening, both in the apocalypse and the pandemic, because our business has caught on fire. But also outside of that, where there seems to be a binary where you're either diving into the deep end of the pool and saying everyone should be Black and queer and all of these things, and women and all of that. But it's lip service. It tends to be, I don't know if it's meant necessarily or if it's understood. And I think that there's a part of it that has to be real, because people really sniff out anybody who's just paying that little bit of lip service to the social change movement. But the other side of it is elevating women who work with you or around you, and giving them the opportunity to lead the projects that they bring into you or that they're working on. I think that there's a cultural dynamic where those of us who have had the fortune of walking straight through the prescription, you go to college, you may get a master's, you have a whole bunch of internships, and that proves your worth, and you climb the ladder very carefully. That relies on understanding how that process works. And I think that there's a deep gulf between education and the people whose cultures we tend to appropriate. And so that is something where you have to do probably twice as much, 4 times as much work to get that person to understand how the system works, and either help them to change the system so that it can work for them, or help them to fit into the system in a way that's meaningful and leads to them to be able to be successful. And I think that it may not seem like that work is worth it. And it may also seem like that work is overwhelming, or that it might yield less of a bottom line. But I think that investing in your talent and really showing that you mean what you say is something that all of us who are in leadership positions, and all of us who have led these change movements at our agencies and around the world, I think we're in a position where we have to actually mean it, and we have to stick to what we said. And it rings so hollow when people are just like, well, we have 4 open seats and 2 of them should be filled by people of color. That it doesn't work quite that way,
Sure.
because it's not quantifiable.
It's walking the talk, if you will. And I feel like, it's something, we were talking a little bit off camera, and how this pandemic is just, you hear it so much, the terms like unprecedented are thrown around. And I feel like that there have been some silver linings to it, in the sense that everyone's having to rethink and reimagine what they're doing, especially in our collective industry. Obviously from the brand side of it, the event side of it, as a communications agency. Now, having your fingers into clearly, a few different facets of your client portfolio, beside obviously the event part of it that in live events got nixed. But where have you seen the biggest change from the pandemic, and just in general in working with your clients? Even let's say from just having this force of pushing digital and reimagining your digital strategy and your social strategy. Like, where do you see the biggest difference now that we're into the pandemic, from the perspective of what your clients' needs are?
I think that the scopes are wildly different. The scopes and the expectations are wildly different. The KPIs and the deliverables are wildly different. And also the understanding of what all of that means. When I started doing this, people didn't know what I was talking about, or they denigrated it, or they thought that, 12 Twitter retweets is great. And they would be satisfied with these statistics because since the statistics were kind of meaningless, they couldn't really quantify them. And it didn't look like it was going to be sales. It didn't look like it was going to be brand impressions. It didn't look like it was going to be useful in the context of business. In the context of personality, some of that engagement, some of that celebrity wasn't as valued then as it is now. And so having conversations about your Instagram and social media strategies and whichever other platform you choose is something that's much more real, and it tends to have more resources put behind it than it used to. When I started doing this, fighting for $200 in Facebook advertising was this big battle. And honestly, in the grand scheme of things, it was pretty meaningless to some of those clients. Now I have clients who come to me with tens and tens of thousands of dollars to spend on dynamic Facebook or social media advertising. And sometimes I have to caution them not to spend it all in one place, to diversify their strategies. And that's a sophistication that took more than 10 years to grow. And it's an understanding of the ROI on social media that's just completely changed the way that we work. In terms of communication strategy, a big part of our growth area this year has actually been crisis communications and helping to handle situations around cancel culture, or helping to assist executives who found themselves in trouble for various reasons. And that has been something where sometimes there's no recourse. And I think that frustrates people with years of experience and heavy portfolios, because they're like, well, I didn't do it. Or if I did do it, that is 5 minutes in the scope of the 5,000 hours I've put into this. And they're just like, why is this so relevant? And sometimes it's because you're physically hurting women, for example. We get people who come to me trying to get me to rescue them, and I can't rescue you from that. Sometimes it's because you didn't mean what you said, and then after D&I training, and you thought that, giving money to a cause would supplant the fact that you may have mistreated the women of color who work for you, or the LGBTQ people who work for you, or the other folks who work for you who can't respect you anymore because of whatever it was that they perceived that you did. And I think that there's this fight in these companies between the staff that may have not had a voice before or who are too afraid, and the folks who are here now. And it's such a different way of being. I remember years ago, I was working on a production, and I'm being really vague, but an individual ended up throwing something at me. He threw a stapler at me, and I basically was done. I was going to walk off the floor, and I had the resources that I could get out of that situation, and I could say, I don't want to work here anymore because you're frankly just impossible to work for and kind of a disgusting person. Most people don't have those resources or that wherewithal. And I think that we underestimate how much people feel trapped in circumstances beyond their control. And then we also underestimate how much anger plays a role in the way that folks are experiencing their workplaces. Yeah. And that is why folks are frustrated at creative agencies, in commercial settings, and all of these settings where ostensibly we're getting to do the work that we love, which is bringing people together, selling ideas, putting ideas out in the world, storytelling. And the reason that they don't want to stay anymore, that we lose talent, ends up being because it's just it's impossible. It is not possible to suffer indignity on a day-to-day basis, and yet we continue to expect, especially the younger people in the industry, to do that. And they've been given this chance to fight back through cancel culture, and they do. I'm not on their side. I'm not on anyone's side, but I also hear the executives who say, hey, wait a second, I didn't mean it that way. It was misinterpreted. It was misquoted. It was screenshotted.
Yeah, taken out of context or whatever the case might be.
And that can be a huge, huge issue. I also have talked to people who said, I didn't mean it that way and I want to make amends. And there aren't any amends right now. We don't have a way to get past being canceled. We don't have a way to get past internal social justice issues. And we don't have a way to get past the fact that there are people who are trying to work in our industry who come from environments where decades and decades of hate have shaped the opinions and thoughts that they have and are bringing to the table.
Sure. I totally get it. So two-part question. First one, if you are someone that may be watching now that might be experiencing what they feel is poor treatment or, being discriminated against in their workplace, or someone that, is involved in a situation they feel that is not good for them, what recommendations would you give them for first initial steps to take? It's got to be an overwhelming thing. Like, you said you're dealing with anger. There's probably this even a feeling of embarrassment that however they might be treating you or calling you out. What advice would you give these folks, or direction would you send them in?
The most practical thing to do is document to your personal email address, document on your phone, document on a non-work device that you control, put it into an archive folder, put it on Google Drive, put it somewhere. If you have photos, if you have text messages, if you have whatever other communications you can, be aware of that. If you're having issues with verbal harassment that is spoken, as in it's a phone call or something like that, depending on what state you're in, you may be in a one-party consent state. If you are, you may be able to record that conversation, and you can archive that for later use if you get to a point where you'd like to pursue litigation. Internally, if your organization has an HR department, bring it up to them. HR can then elevate it to the proper channels. If you don't see evidence of that, then it's time to speak to any state governing body that deals with employment, EEOC, for example, OSHA in some circumstances, physical circumstances mostly, and then also any other state department that applies to the situation you see. The other thing that you can do is you can raise it to local or national employment attorneys if you'd like. Sometimes it's worth doing, sometimes it's not. But all of those things are very practical steps and are the more correct steps in the eyes of the law.
Sure.
In the eyes of sort of the social justice, like digital social justice movement, and in the context of cancel culture, the first thing that you have to remember, and this is what I tell every single person who comes to me with these sorts of problems, particularly in the context of sexual harassment, but overall in the context of poor treatment in some way, you have to decide that you're okay with this being part of your life for many years. The average case that we work on is 2 to 3 years. We're often hired by litigation attorneys. And during the course of that 2 to 3 years, you may or may not be able to work based off of the situation you found yourself in. It will be held against you in many cases, and there's absolutely no way to prove that. So you have to be aware that if you open this door, particularly on social platforms, in some ways it's fleeting, and in other ways it is permanent. And you have to have really made a reasoned decision about what you'd like to do in the circumstances. If it's sexual harassment or physical assault or anything that's actually related to your personal safety, absolutely get out of that situation. Absolutely be willing to talk about it in public. Absolutely take it to the cops or take it to a governing body. If it is reputational issues, or if it's just a he said, she said thing, be careful about how you make those decisions and how you move forward before you get anywhere near your social media feeds. And then if you do choose to pursue it on social platforms, work with a group of people, make sure that you're strategic, make sure you are aligned, and make sure that ultimately the consequences are something that you want to live with. Because you could be ruining someone who didn't mean it's career, and that's a conscious side of it. You could be taking down someone who is a serial abuser of people who work in your area of the industry. And it's only up to you to tell, but it is also something where you can also be held legally accountable if, in fact, it's proven that it's libel or slander. And so you have to be very, very aware. And also, please, for the love of God, don't abuse this, because trust from the public is very hard to earn. And a lot of our sexual assault and sexual harassment regulations come under fire because of that one time that one girl lied about it, or that one time that one boy lied about it. And that's just not worth the capital for the rest of us, because what happens if you are the one who's sexually assaulted?
No, I totally get it. And I think that's some excellent guidelines, and I'm sure that's could be very helpful to a lot of people watching. I think there's probably a disturbing amount of folks that deal with this on a daily basis and are just afraid because they don't know and they're overwhelmed by it. Now, the second part of my question would be on the flip side of that. Obviously not to someone that is legitimately abusing people or monstrous in that kind of way, but to someone that perhaps something was taken out of context, perhaps maybe something was misconstrued. Obviously, without letting the tricks out of the bag of your arsenal, what advice would you give them? To someone that may be finding themselves in a situation like that.
Before anything else gets out into the public, or before you talk to anyone else, observe what your agency, your entity's legal practices, best practices are. That means bring the issue to HR before HR brings the issue to you. That means bring to your personal counsel if you have an attorney. Bring to your executives, your boss, your manager, your leadership, whoever they are. Bring it to them before the plaintiff, whoever they are, can carry it into the office. Be aware that there may be documentation that you are going to have to deal with. Documentation may be all of the stuff I just told somebody to put in her Google Drive. Documentation might be something like, hey, a camera in an elevator. Documentation can be all sorts of different things that you aren't even aware of. It can be very cleverly cut screenshots from Slack, for example, if you think about what happened to Steph Curry over at Away. It can be all sorts of other things. And the second thing to do is to be very aware and very careful about the ways that you engage with your staff, both below you and above you. And by careful, I mean, I have told time and time again, yes, we live in a party environment. No, you should not party with your employees. And advice. You can take them out for a drink, one drink, but you're going to get in a hell of a lot of trouble if you accidentally do something or misconstrue something someone says. In addition to that, you shouldn't be taking advantage of power. It's a really, really hard time to have an inter-office romance. Please don't. That will be so much more expensive than it was worth. And yes, okay, some of us have fallen in love with our colleagues, but in comparison, I don't know that that's always the case. So be really cynical about what you're willing to do. If you wanted to be the most cautious of cautious, limit the number of one-on-one meetings you have, or if you do one-on-one meetings, do it in a way where the door is open or something like that. If you absolutely must have a one-on-one meeting, particularly with a staffer who might be causing trouble in the context of D&I, or who may be perceived as a troublemaker in the context of D&I, be aware of your documentation. Take contemporaneous notes either during the meeting or after the meeting. Email them to yourself, BCC yourself. Oftentimes, one of the things we can't get is, or at least can't get quickly, is internal emails. So be conscious of that. And also be aware that any sentence you type into Slack or equivalent is something that can be discovered. It is not hard for me to get an archive of Slack. It is not hard for me to get an archive of any other similar product that was made by someone else. And you just need to be aware that that sort of thing can be held against you. In addition to that, behaving with decorum is something that you just are obligated to do now. And I can't say that enough. I can't say that with enough vigor even. You need to behave with good manners. You need to keep your cool during your meetings. You need to make sure that, conventional swearing is fine. Ad hominem attack type swearing is not. That is, and any time where a person who perhaps is not performing to their best is being disciplined for such things or being encouraged to behave differently, that is an opportunity where that person may or may not choose to engage with your ability to be their boss or their person of authority. And in those cases, it is very hard to do the right thing, particularly if emotions are running high. But at the same time, if you don't behave, you can lose your career, and it's often not worth it for that production assistant who forgot to wake up on time. So it really depends on where you are in your career, but document, be circumspect, behave properly, keep your hands to yourself, don't drink with your colleagues, and above all, behave with respect towards other people's race, religion, creed, sexual orientation, and such.
Excellent advice, Kate, that I'm sure, especially in this, the tensions are running high across the globe right now, especially in the pandemic and everything that's going on. And as it is a time when we're finally seeing the needle start to move in the fight for racial equality and gender equality, for that matter. I can't tell you how much I sincerely appreciate you coming on the show and sharing all of this with us. Now, something I'd like to do as we get near the end of the interview is we'll shift gears a little bit lighter now. And based off of everything you've told us, you're an amazing person, Kate. And by your accomplishments and what you're doing, I commend you. And I'd like to know, can you share something about Kate that people wouldn't know that you'd like to share with them?
Well, I don't know if people wouldn't know it, but I literally came to this interview straight off a horse. So I've recently, during COVID, taken up the riding to the hunt, which is chasing various creatures all over the countryside in upstate New York. Actually, today it was New Jersey. And it is my new favorite thing in a time where racing around the countryside on a horse is completely impractical on just about every possible level.
Yeah.
Today we found 3 foxes and a cat. The dogs got most excited about the cats, which is also kind of hilarious. I come from, as I said, my mother's a shepherd. And so back home on the farm, there's a part of my personality where I go stand out in the backyard hollering at the dogs to get the sheep to come in.
That's awesome.
And it is unique, and it is, I think I'm the only New York City, West Village resident who does this, to my knowledge, save for perhaps Sarah Montague over at WNYC. So
could I get perhaps an example of how you holler at the dogs? Say, for example, you're on the back porch right now. Do you think I could make that happen?
No, thank you. But yeah, no, it's a really interesting sport. So you've got to wave to me and come by, and I swear to you, I will do it backwards because my mother will then watch it and she will then inform me how I did the shopping.
How you did it wrong. That's it's interesting. I'm based in Burbank in Los Angeles area, and where I live is near the Equestrian Center.
Oh, great.
So what's really great is one of my dearest friends, she and her 16-year-old son, they go riding all the time and come visit afterwards. And they've taken me to the stables to meet all the different horses and animals that live there, as they utilize that for a lot of the productions and films, where all these animals live. But what's really great is around Burbank, you'll be heading over to the corner convenience store in the middle of a busy mini mall on the corner like you see in LA, and traffic going by, and then there's a person riding a horse in a lane that's got a painted lane down the street with a sign that looks like it's for cars, but it says horses only. Going down the street there, I'm like, when I first moved here, I was like kind of scratching my head. I'm like, wait a minute. Oh, okay, great. There's stables around. So
I mean, I'm here for that. When I was living in London many years ago, we could do that near the Wimbledon stables. It's actually right looking over the Wimbledon tennis.
Oh, wow.
So that was fun. But yeah, you walk through town on your horse. It's like the best thing ever.
It's something to this day where, like, now when I'm out running around in the neighborhood, and I'll come across folks, and sometimes people are walking the horse, they're crossing the street, whatever. Everyone that's local, we kind of have this, we wave and the nod kind of thing. That's really great, Kate, and I really can't tell you again how much I appreciate you coming on the show today. For anybody interested that maybe want to procure your services or know more about you, how can they find you?
So our websites are Greyhorse, GREYHORSE.cc, and my personal website is kategardiner.com, GARDINER. You can also find me on just about any social platform at Kate Gardiner, and I can lead you down the garden path to the rest of my staff.
Oh, that's really good. Lead you down the garden path. Leading down the garden path. Ladies and gentlemen, Kate Gardiner from the Grey Horse Agency. Thank you so much, Kate. And for all of you for watching and supporting us, thank you so much. Of course, we can continue this conversation over on EventSpeak. That's at eventspeak.com. I'm still Big John, and reminding all of you to take care of yourselves and each other. We'll see you next time.